In this episode, Lara Logan on socialism in America. I'm Oliver North, and our guest today, Lara Logan. Her candid reporting has earned her prominence among the world's best foreign correspondents. In her role on CBS 60 Minutes, Lara Logan's helped us understand human conflicts around the world, including Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, Palestine, Egypt. She lived in Iraq for 5 years at the height of the war, and when U.S. troops entered Baghdad in 2003, she was there. Lara has earned numerous awards for her journalism, including 3 Emmys, 9 nominations for Emmys, and the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award. Her latest venture is her new in-depth investigative series, Lara Logan Has No Agenda, on Fox Nation. Her new season features 4 episodes on socialism in America and premieres on September 14th, which is why I wanted to talk to her today. Lara, thank you for taking time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lara, socialism, I mean, for heaven's sakes, why socialism in your new season?
Well, it's a really interesting question, especially because when it was first proposed, I thought, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. But then right as we were about to start shooting and putting the episode together, the streets went up in flames. And socialism suddenly went from being something that was insidiously sneaking into the American way of life through the political structures and different policies throughout the country, especially in a place like California. Suddenly it became front and center. Ideas that really were very, very radical a few months ago are now being discussed by mainstream politicians and actually have been acted upon in big cities like Los Angeles and New York. Things like, abolishing the police, right? I mean, a few months ago, people would have thought that was ridiculous and insane and not even a remote possibility. Now, the entire Minneapolis Police Department has actually been defunded by the city council. Los Angeles has slashed their police budgets. So has New York. So have other places. And nobody is blinking an eye. In fact, the movement is still growing.
Well, I look at what's transpiring today and say, we've lost our minds. I mean, the bottom line of it is when you dial 911 and they put you on hold, and you've got criminals breaking into your property or committing horrible acts. I mean, look at some of the stuff that Antifa's been doing. Antifa would be a socialist organization, to put it kindly, in the era of the Bolshevik.
They'd be the militant army of the socialists.
Yeah.
They'd be the brown shirts and, of Hitler, right, and the black shirts of Mussolini, the enforcers, right? They would be the police. They want to get rid of the police force because they'll be your police. Them and the big tech companies surveilling you.
What's this mean and how it affects this upcoming election in, 50 some odd days?
Well, it means everything because, in fact, if you look at Antifa's propaganda, they've been putting out bulletins and sending out the word for everybody to converge on Washington, D.C. and help in the siege of the White House that is supposed to begin on September 17th and to continue for 50 days. And if you look at what does that do, well, it takes you through the election, right? And the idea really is that regardless of the election result, Donald Trump cannot stay in power. And Antifa are the army on the streets that's going to make sure that happens. They're only one part of the strategy, but they're a very important part, because they're right there in front of the cameras. They're creating the impression of civil disobedience and civil unrest. They're furthering, the propaganda narrative that the government has lost the support of the governed, right? And so therefore the government has to be removed. And of course, in this case, the government is Donald Trump and his administration. But this is going to go far beyond Donald Trump and his administration. Their plan is a long-term one. It's really a fight for absolute power. And they have no intention, once they take power back, they don't have any intention of ever seeing it swing between left and right, Republican, Democrat ever again. This is it forever for them.
looking at the nexus of anarchists with people who do believe in social justice, it seems to me there's an education that's absolutely necessary for the young Americans who are participating in this activity to stop, take a breath, and that's not going to happen in the next 50 some odd days.
I think you hit on what is probably, if you could say it, the single most important thing. To me, it is the single most important thing because it is so deceptive and so sinister. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. You have what really looks like a radical agenda out on the streets being carried out by Antifa. But that agenda and the tactics that they're using are replicated throughout our society right now, through the economic, through the environmental movement, the LGBTQ movement, the movement for prison reform, for voter reform, for any form of social justice is really being molded as in according to these civil society organizations, such as Momentum, which wrote the doctrine on guiding the resistance, Indivisible, which is another one of them, the OFA of the Obama Alumni Association. They basically provide the blueprint for these revolutions. It was really the father of all of this was the Sunrise movement and the color revolution. And all of these organizations are carrying out the same system of revolution, just in the name of a different form of social justice. But really, they're fighting for the same thing. Each one of them wants to destroy whatever exists and create a new order based on that ideology. So you have really a whole series of different movements covering all different things that are seeking to fundamentally change the American way of life. So the LGBTQ movement, for example, one of the things that they've been doing is something called Drag Queen Story Hour. Now you say those words and you sound a little bit like a crazy right winger, right? What are you talking about? And why do you have a problem with drag queens? And aren't you being sort of homophobic and offensive? Well, no, it's got nothing to do with that. But why do you need the American Library Association to put drag queens in public libraries and read stories to young children? I was a mom in Washington, D.C., where there's more working mothers than any other state in the nation. And so the story hour at the public libraries is very important to all of us. If we couldn't make it, you had a family member or a nanny or someone who took your children there. Why do you have to have drag queens in the libraries reading to young children? What is that really about? What is at the core of that? And if you object to that, what happens to you is that you get canceled, right? You get eviscerated, you get targeted, you get annihilated and destroyed, and you get dismissed as being a terrible, terrible, terrible person. So no one's allowed to even talk about it. Well, that is just one tiny example of what's happening. And these organizations like Momentum, where do they go to teach this craft of how to start your own rebellion or your own revolution or your own social justice movement? They go to the high schools. Well, they're in the high schools teaching
it also seems to me that one of the things that I thought Donald Trump did a good job at, in creating jobs, he gave dignity to work. In other words, it wasn't just the matter of the fact that you could show the unemployment numbers dropping or the employment numbers for minorities increasing. And then along comes COVID-19, and it's suddenly the same people who just gotten jobs. And some of the reports, for example, of black men finding work went back to the families that they created, whether they're married or not, and walked home proudly carrying a check. And all of a sudden, come February, March of this year, that job is gone. And so an awful lot of what Antifa and some of these very radical movements have created has been done because work is gone. I mean, tens of millions of people out of work that weren't before, that had gone to work. And so do things get better? I mean, as you're making this series, do things get better for, if you will, the remarkable experiment that we have in this country after we have some kind of vaccination against COVID? Do things get better?
Well, it's interesting that you raised that particular point, because on a tactical level, not a strategic one, just tactically speaking, how have you been able to sustain these protests and riots for so long? They want you to believe, the propaganda is, it's because of the depth of social outrage, right? And the depth and scale of the problem, because now the whole system, all of us are racist, whether we know it or don't know it. But really, what the pandemic created was the ability to sustain it. Because what normally happens with any kind of protests or demonstrations or riots is they happen over the weekends, because come Monday morning, people have to go to work. Well, it just so happens this began when? In the midst of a pandemic, which put massive numbers of people in their homes with nowhere to go and nothing else to do. And now here comes, whether it's Antifa or the political organizations, the civil society organizations that are backing them, and they're offering you money to go out there. They're offering you money to travel. They're giving you something to do, and they're also giving you a purpose. So, and that enables them to recruit people who really act as shields for the true agenda here. And some would even say that you need to take a closer look at exactly what are these incidents that are sparking these protests, because many of them happen in very unusual circumstances. I mean, George Floyd's death on camera, or alleged murder to many people, I mean, was unusual even to policemen who said it turned their stomach watching what they saw, right? Well, so we haven't even begun to have that conversation. But what you also have in terms of the pandemic and in terms of jobs is you've hit on the ideology here, because in Antifa's abolitionist ideology, one of the things that they demonize is work. Work is bad. Because why? Because America is not a country, it's a plantation, and workers are slaves. And they're slaving away while you, as the big overlords, the wealthy, are exploiting them. And so the very act of working that's been at the cornerstone of what it is, what built the American dream, right? It's built on hard work. That is now a bad thing, because work is synonymous with slavery. And in the state and the world that they envision for this country, you don't own any property at all. So you don't own any businesses. You don't own any property. Land is a living thing. So then you come to the nexus with the environmental movement, right? Land is a living entity and it cannot be owned. In fact, there's something evil in even talking about ownership of land. And look how this is now creeping into the pandemic and mainstream, political structures in the US. Not that the CDC is supposed to be political, but who just recently took over the whole issue of rent and landlords. The CDC just said no one is allowed to be evicted. We're taking this over because people are in their homes. Because if you push them out of these homes that they can't pay their rent on, they're going to spread COVID, and it's going to make the pandemic worse. Therefore, we're stepping in here and we're saying landlords cannot evict anybody. So now you're one step closer, because now the Center for Disease Control is dictating an economic policy and a political policy, and et cetera, et cetera. And nobody even noticed. Nobody even blinked an eye. Lara, since when does the CDC dictate these things?
Lara, who's paying for the air flights for the vandals, the arsonists, the anarchists, the Bolsheviks? Who is paying for this? Is not an inexpensive endeavor. Who's behind it?
No, it costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. Well, so it's a very good question, who's behind it. And I do have a strong sense of that. But what I will tell you is that there are two main pillars of funding for these movements. And one is through, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, that kind of thing, through an app called Act Blue. So it's pretty much like the PayPal of the left, of the progressive left. And the money is being sent and raised through them, and Act Blue distributes it to various, progressive movements and causes and politicians and leaders. And that's sort of the practical grassroots arm of this. On the other side of it, you really are looking at a network of 501(c)(3) PFCs, of basically charitable foundations, who are laundering money in the name of social justice and in the name of democracy. And it goes from one charity to the next to the next. And, I mean, I can't even say the name of where many of those lead to. One is the Ford Foundation, that isn't talked about very much. But they are right there at the center and at the heart of much of this funding. And another one is the Open Society Foundation. But if you say that name, oh, that's the kiss of death, right? I mean, I just slit my own throat because they're coming for me. And they have a lot more resources and a lot more power, time, money. They have everything I don't have. And they have information dominance, because what does that mean? They control the information space. So most of the media are ideologically in line with them, or they now have a vested interest in seeing them prevail, and they have political operatives operating throughout the media. So you literally have media organizations in this country who think nothing of quoting Media Matters for America, which is the propaganda arm of the strategy that we've just been discussing, and somehow the New York Times is okay with that, which is just inexplicable to me.
I want to send you a copy of a book that my publishing company just put out. It's coming out next week, called America's Number One Adversary. And you can then do a series on that, because I am of the belief that the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and of course their vaunted leader, are indeed behind a good bit of this stuff. So I want to thank you for making time to be with us today. And I look forward to having you back, because you've given us, I think, a lot to think about, a lot to act on. And of course, changing our political process, doing away with things like the Electoral College, or affecting the outcomes of small businesses that no longer can survive, or small family farms. All of which you're touching about in this series is fascinating. And I encourage everybody to make sure that they watch and go to Fox Nation and look for Lara Logan, who has no agenda, but she's really good at it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Folks, if this Real American Heroes special broadcast has been informative, helpful, or encouraging, take time now to subscribe and let me know how these unprecedented events have affected you and yours. By so doing, you'll become part of this historical record of how America persevered and hopefully once again prospered. Until next time, remember, Semper Fidelis is more than a slogan for U.S. Marines. Always faithful is a way of life.